So happy Friday, everyone, and thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us on a Friday afternoon where I know folks have so much to do. This is our monthly LPP hosted webinar, and so excited to have this conversation today because I believe it will enlighten you all on the clemency process. And so that's why it's named Behind the Scenes of a Clemency Petition, because there's so much that goes into clemency that I think most folks are unaware of. And I believe that most folks don't understand that if you're in federal prison, and maybe state, but this is one of the only ways to find relief for your sentence. And it is not an easy tackle. Corvain has been quoted saying that it's better than the lottery. And so I am super excited to be having this conversation with two men who just won federal clemency petitions, along with the two women who helped to make it happen. And so I would first like to start with introductions. And because I cannot, I don't think, articulate the work that these women have done so well, that I will allow them to do a brief introduction of themselves, starting with my director at LPP, Sarah Gersten.
Thank you, Evelyn. As Evelyn said, my name is Sarah. I'm the Executive Director and General Counsel at Last Prisoner Project. So I oversee the entire organization, but I also lead our legal programs that revolve around the release of those incarcerated for cannabis offenses. And two of our core programs are our state and our federal clemency program. And that happens in partnership with the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers as part of the Cannabis Justice Initiative. So I'll turn it over to JaneAnne to talk a little more about herself and NACDL.
Hi, my name is JaneAnne Murray, and I am a board member at NACDL, the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. I also run its Trial Penalty Clemency Project, and I teach at the University of Minnesota Law School, where I run a clemency project. So clemency has become something I've sort of lived and breathed since 2014, when I was asked to work on the consortium of private of defense organizations to recruit and train lawyers to represent people under President Obama's clemency initiative.
Which was an initiative for sure. And then for the fellas that we have, Craig and Corvain, if you could tell us, not the entire story, we'll get to that, but if you can tell us who you are and what your sentence and your conviction was. Craig?
Well, I was charged originally in 2001, convicted in 2002 of conspiring to distribute marijuana. My business repaired trucks for a out-of-state trucking company, and they said I knew that they used the trucks to haul marijuana.
And how much time did they give you?
Although I was a first-time offender with nothing on my record, I was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. And
right. And I was not smiling at that. I was smiling at Sarah's cat, but that is the point that I was driving here, is that for that conspiracy to distribute, you received a life sentence. And Corvain, how about you?
I was sentenced in 2014. We went to trial. Me and Natalia went to trial 2013, and I was convicted of marijuana distribution, tax evasion, and money laundering. And I was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for a state that I've never even been to in my entire life, just for mailing the marijuana to this state. And I was set to die in prison, and got my clemency January 20th, 2021.
So this is going to be a really intense conversation, right? Because we have two men who almost lost their life over the distribution of cannabis, which was deemed essential business during a global pandemic in 2020. That just gave me chills. And so I'll just jump right into the conversation because there's so much to be said in only an hour that that really just shook me up a bit. So I'll start with Sarah and JaneAnne. Can you tell us, one or the other, however you wanted to do this, Why is clemency why is it so important? And why is it an underused tool for reforming our system currently?
Well, I can start maybe from the cannabis perspective, and maybe JaneAnne, you could zoom out. I think what we're seeing in states that are legalizing or have legalized, unfortunately, is that there really have not been any mechanisms until very recently to release those that are still incarcerated for activity that is now legalized and regulated at the state level. And of course, federally, there's no relief for those incarcerated at the federal level where cannabis is still illegal. Now we're starting to see legislation that includes resentencing, but even the states that have done that, it's very, very limited. And there's a very almost negligible sometimes class of people that would be eligible for that resentencing. And what we have seen are states and governors' offices utilize the clemency power as an alternative to legislation to provide relief for those that have cannabis offenses on their records. So we've seen a broader use of the pardon power in states like Colorado and Illinois as a way to clear the records or offer forgiveness for those that have cannabis offenses on their records. Again, part of what we're trying to do with our state clemency program is provide commutations. So that would be actually getting folks out of prison that are still there for cannabis related offenses, because again, that's something that's really not happening through legislation. So that's why we really want to push executive offices to utilize this tool. But JaneAnne can speak more to sort of broadly why clemency is important and maybe why it's often underutilized.
Right. Well, Sarah just touched on it there, the issue of the few options for relief post-conviction. Once a conviction is final, which will happen after you've gone through the appeals process, which may take 6 months to a year, there may be some post-conviction options to address things like ineffective assistance, but generally, a lot of states will limit the capacity to go back to court about that and put time limits on it. And at the federal level, there's a 1-year time limit, and that's it. Then suddenly you've got people like Corvain and Craig that have gone through their appeals, and now they're suffering these very draconian and really disproportionate sentences for relatively minor nonviolent offenses. It's a vestige of the war on drugs. The war on drugs wasn't necessarily focused specifically on marijuana, but the people with marijuana convictions became part of that sort of I would say almost that lost generation of individuals who were forced to accept either very lengthy guilty pleas or went to trial and got absolutely, all you can say is hammered by the sentencing guidelines and the sentencing statutes and the sentencing judges post-trial for having exercised their right to go to trial. And so these are a forgotten group of people that have absolutely no mechanism to get a second look judicially. Clemency is their only route. Why is it underutilized? Because it's never a priority for executives to start using their political capital on individuals behind bars who can't vote for them. And keep in mind that many of these individuals are housed in prisons that are in poorly populated areas, but they count on a census level as residents of that county, giving outsized voting power to the individuals who live in that prison area, who work in that prison. And so you can see how the system ends up giving outsized voting power to prison guards and the prison lobby and the prison industrial complex, while taking away voting power from the communities where these prisoners originally resided. So it's a vicious circle. And so executives are loath to use this power, but when they do, and when we can get to speak to them symbolically, it's very powerful when they exercise it. So clemency to me is symbolically powerful. From a numbers level, it's not really making a huge dent on the need that's out there, but it is an important symbolical statement that speaks to the electorate and hopefully leads to more lenient policies, more lenient charging policies, more lenient prosecutorial policies, more lenient sentencing, and ultimately maybe other second look mechanisms that would let these individuals go back to court.
We are all hopeful for that, for sure. What you just said about executives, just they don't even have the time to be concerned, right? Like it is not, the system is not set up in a way where our president has the capacity to manage these petitions. And so looking back at the last two administrations, both Obama and Biden, I was incarcerated during the Obama administration. So I remember the clemency push and his initiative. But yet we have Craig and Corvain here, who were both released under the Trump administration. And so we will never be able to say that he did not take his clemencies serious. But now we have Biden. And so not yet sure where this is going, but looking forward, JaneAnne, is what do you think Biden can take from both of those administrations looking forward, and how can they implement change?
Well, I think the most significant thing to take from this is that it's a bipartisan issue, and that President Trump certainly did not feel uncomfortable exercising this power to release a whole bunch of individuals in on drug cases. And he made quite a, gave quite a lot of publicity having Alice Johnson at the White House, for example. And this did not result, anything that I saw, like a revolt among his electorate, among his constituency. So to me, what these two examples say to me is that there is bipartisan support, that a Democratic president and a Republican president both feel their constituencies would support this. And so that should give a shot of courage to the legislature to make changes that will benefit everybody, and also hopefully be a message to President Biden that this is something that isn't going to be so politically difficult for him to do. There is support, and of course both administrations told the stories of these individuals, and so the public really does, I think, get the idea that there are, beating hearts, human beings behind these statistics.
Yeah, so all of you listening, you heard it, Biden, it will not be that hard to get this done. So everyone, when we wrap, you make sure that he gets this conversation live.
If I could jump in on that, Evelyn, we have, I'll put it in the link, but we have a petition and a campaign called A Time to Heal to try to get Biden to grant categorical clemency for cannabis offenders. So I'll put that in the chat so you can sign on to that. And I'll also just echo what JaneAnne said. Again, for our constituency, I think what the Trump administration showed was not just that this kind of reform is bipartisan, but that release of people incarcerated for cannabis offenses is really bipartisan. They obviously wanted to identify some of those individuals like Craig and Corvain. And again, I think you can see now social attitudes have changed. A majority of Americans believe cannabis should be legalized. So it's clear why that's a really good group of people for clemency. And so we're hopeful. And if you've seen any of the sort of statements coming out of the White House on this, I do think that's a category of people that they are looking at for potential reforms. So we do hope that we can sort of galvanize you all, our supporters in the public, to get behind that effort.
Yes. Please sign the petition, A Time to Heal. And if you go to the website, lastprisonerproject.org, it is, I believe it's a pop-up right now. Please sign the petition. And so Corvain, can you, because I'm inside information here, there was more than one clemency petition put together, but can you tell us what it's like to be behind the walls putting together your clemency petition? What does that entail? I personally did mine literally on the typewriter in prison by myself. So there's no wonder why mine did not work. But can you tell us what that is like, putting together a comprehensive clemency petition while still in prison?
It's very, very, it's like, it's really, that's why I said it's the lottery. It's like better than lottery, because you're putting in a lottery ticket and your hope out of maybe, you know, with the Obama administration, with him leaving, with him doing so many clemencies, Craig can probably contest to this, it was maybe 300,000 or 200,000 applications or 400,000 applications that were submitted that he's choosing from, because his push was so big, right? So I believe we both got denied on that. So we got denied on the Obama. So when it was time to change and Trump was coming in, and Trump had so much backlash on, is Trump going to do this? Is Trump going to do that? Why would you even go with Trump? It's like people didn't even want to put in the application because of the bad thing. I looked at that as more of an opportunity, right?
What does the application require?
It requires you to state that I have officially, there's no more, you have exhausted all your remedies with the courts. It's no more remedies with the courts. You're not into it with the courts. You don't have anything more things to file. You have gave up everything and all your rights. And this is your last chance for hope to say, I sold marijuana, but I do not deserve to be in here for the rest of my life. So you're admitting to what that you've done, and you want to be forgiven. And thank you to the signatures that you guys are talking about. I have 156,000 signatures on my petition. So anyone that signed any petition or anything, you're of help, and it's free for you to do. So please go into the chat and sign, because all those things, some people signed my petition and just kept writing, kept being friends, and I'm still friends with these people today. So you can meet a friend, you can help out with the 156,000, because now when other people see that it's getting so much push, some people are followers to things that have a lot of push to it. So if they see something that's only 1,000 people or 100 people, some people don't want to sign it because they don't feel no one else is doing it. Some of the follower people, and some people say, well, 156,000 people did it. That makes them want to do it. So now you get an extra 10 people or something and so forth. But we went on, and my attorney, I didn't even write the second one. I had my attorney, Patrick McGruer, he wrote, and he asked Trump, as a citizen of New York and as a taxpayer citizen that has 2 daughters like I have, to just let me get a second chance at life. And I read it, I said, let's go with it. I cried when I read it, and it was a miracle, and it takes a very big push for this to happen. This is not a walk in the park. So you need the whole world, you need everyone to be on the same page and the same panel to complete the same goal, and that's the free to 40K, and that's what I'm here to do.
Thank you. Craig, what was that process sort of step by step for you, right? Because I know you spent a lot of time in the law library, and I know that you spent a lot of time helping other folks out, right, with their cases. And so I would like to hear, like, step by step, did you fill out the application by yourself? Were there organizations? Like, what is that process when you're fighting for your life?
Well, the most amazing thing about mine is it's really a proof of how arbitrary the clemency process is. The truth of the matter is, I never filed a clemency with the Trump administration. I did file one when all my court proceedings were done and post-conviction stuff were done back under George Bush, and that one was denied. I filed one under the Obama administration, and I even had help from a top-end attorney. And there's two main questions that you have to answer in a clemency petition. You explain basically in your own words why you're in prison, what you did to be in prison. And what they're really looking for is for you to say that this is what I did. I'm sorry for it. I'm not going to do it again. However that's expressed. And then you have to explain why the president should grant you clemency. And really what seems to be, every president has different set of logic. Like President Obama, granted clemency to people that if they were sentenced today, they would have a much shorter sentence. That was his logic to decide whether he should grant relief or not. With President Trump, his overall logic in looking at clemency candidates was to look if the sentence just did not fit the crime. And virtually everyone he granted, he did that. Now, instead of filing a clemency petition under President Trump, I wrote a letter to Jared Kushner. And the contents of that letter was in the announcement from the White House that they granted clemency to me. This was just a 2-paragraph letter. But what also happened to show how arbitrary the process is shortly after Christmas, President Trump got a lot of good press over a clemency he granted. And he reached out to Alice Johnson to say, bring me some perfect candidates. I really want to, you know, I'm not going to be president after January. You know, I really want to go out with a bang and, you know, find me some perfect applications. Alice Johnson reached out to a woman named Nadia saying, I know you deal with prisoners, you know, please come up with this list for me. Nadia reached out to a woman named Mindy, who oversees a lot of marijuana prisoners. And she gave a list that ended up in Alice Johnson's hand, who carried it right into the White House herself. And to follow up on that list that Alice Johnson left, Sarah started corresponding with the White House. So all this was done informally. And although I was on the list signed by President Trump on January 19th, because I didn't have a clemency petition in the office and all that, my clemency wasn't actually granted until the beginning of April, because I had a fight to get a formal grant because there was no application to grant. But that shows you how arbitrary the process is. I was in there because I got the support of grassroots people fighting for us. It wasn't a, you know, clever legal brief. It wasn't a clever legal trick. It wasn't even a, you know, a special way of telling a story. It was just a process of convincing the president what was right or wrong.
Right.
And I think that's what we have to do now to convince the president to look, especially look at marijuana convictions differently than anything else.
Right.
Because I remember sitting on the bunk a year ago, looking out the window in the cell door at the 60-minute special of all the marijuana grow operations. Now imagine that when my paper hanging on the wall says I have a life sentence for marijuana.
I can imagine. I think you and Corvain and I can all imagine what that is like. I think you bring up a good point, though, with your clemency being granted without an application. That lets you know that this process is really not what is keeping folks from freedom. It is the backdoor handling of this process, and how do we change this process, and how do we streamline this process. I would also like to add, and I'll let you speak to it, because your freedom came early because of the compassionate release, correct? Am I saying that? No.
I was still serving my sentence.
Right. How did they let you out early? It was COVID.
Yes, actually, I made the warden so mad by leading a lot of protests in the prison. I literally got thrown out of prison because the bottom line is people serving life sentences cannot be released to home confinement.
Right, right.
I was, with a wink and a nod from the warden, telling me, "I want you out of here, and I'm not worried about you committing another crime." So that law, though, passed by the Congress and of course signed by the president, said that the Bureau of Prisons, based on the people in the Bureau of Prisons, the warden and the people that immediately oversee the particular prisoners, they get to determine, is this person safe to put out on the street?
Right.
I was one of the people they deemed safe, even though I wasn't even eligible.
Right.
But the people that are currently out on home confinement, although they're still serving their sentences, in all those cases, the people that are closest to them in the prison have all determined that we really know this person, and we're not worried about them committing a crime. And that's the system we need to expand on.
Right.
That's a system that worked well to get people released under the CARES Act, under the COVID release, as I was. There was 4,000 people, that were released under that. And but we need that to apply to clemency so that they really look at the person, the crime, the sentence, rather than the legal proceeding and what the prosecutor wants.
Absolutely.
And just because Craig mentioned it, so he was released as part of the CARES Act, which happened under COVID, to release those. Like Craig said, these are people that went through a very rigorous process to say, there's really no risk of them reoffending. They might be vulnerable. And under the Trump administration, they had put out guidance basically saying, but once, the pandemic is ended, that they can be sent back. And unfortunately, the Biden administration has not reversed that. So those 4,000 people, luckily Craig now has been granted clemency, but those other 4,000 people are at risk of going back to prison after they've been reunited with their families, started rebuilding their lives, making these connections. And that would just be a tremendous injustice. So that's another call to action. I know both Last Prisoner Project and NACDL want people to voice up that we really need this administration to let those folks stay home. The campaign is keep them home, because it just doesn't make any sense. And it would really just be incredibly cruel. So another campaign for our supporters to get on board with.
And that is the point, actually, Sarah, that I was driving to, is that could you imagine coming home, right, and had Craig not won that clemency, then been asked to return to prison? I'll be honest, I would not have been able to make that drive, and I assume that there will be many folks when that time comes who will not be able to make that drive. So please support that. Corvain, speaking to returning home, right? Returning home to your life, your kids, after a judge said that they thought that it would be better if you spent the rest of your life in prison. What have been some of the challenges, or what I would drive this question to say is, what could have been done better as a return? How can we help? What was lacking in your return home?
Return home, that was been the most difficultest thing for me, is that it's like your past is not in your past. You just got a clemency from the president of the United States, but yet one of my uncles died and left me some money, right? My uncle died, left me some money, and they closed my bank account. They wouldn't even accept my bank account after I served 9 years for this crime. They would not accept my bank account on the money that they gave me. They called me down there to give me the money because I'm a beneficiary, and because of my past of me money laundering on this case, they wouldn't even accept the money that they're giving me. Wells Fargo wouldn't even accept the money. They didn't accept my money. They gave me my money back for my GoFundMe. Navy Federal was the only bank that allowed me. They shut off 2 of my credit cards after using my credit cards and paying my credit on time and paying everything on time. I used the credit card. I have good credit. I have a 700 biker score, but yet no credit cards. I only have 1 credit card with Navy Federal because all the other credit cards got shut off because I can't use the credit card because I was a money launderer. So it's like your past, you're living in a box. You can't get in the industry the way you want with plant touching. You can't smoke. You can't do a lot of things. A lady came over to my house, the parole officer, she wants you to piss and ask you questions and go look in your closet and stuff. So you're still in a box. I would like me and Craig to get some pardons, so we can start our life, so we can travel the world, so we can see other things. I would love for all the guys, we woke up to each other by us being on so many platforms, me and Craig. It's like we all know each other. We know John Knock, we know Craig, we know the guys, we know Michael, we know everybody because we were all in the same boat together, where we were called pals, prisoners of war. So we would just want to be able to live our life freely without all the attachments of, we've already had our life taken. We've already had everything stripped from us. They went in the safe deposit box, they took your money, they did all this. all we're asking to is just give us a real second chance at life. You know, let us really get a second chance and let us start over and let us not be living in a box on the street where we're still technically in a box. So we just want the change broken.
And that's the point, is that even with freedom, freedom is not guaranteed, right? Unemployment becomes an issue, banking becomes an issue, housing, there's so many, you know, your state run housing, you're disqualified for being a drug offender. There's no state assistance because you're a drug offender, but yet you have the entire community saying, hey, we let you out, now go be great, right? But there is no assistance, and besides the lack of assistance, right, there is still barriers in not getting hired. And even if you're wanting to do this the you know, correct way, the 9 to 5, there's still many barriers to that. And so freedom does not end at a clemency, but it began. And so we are super grateful for that. And so to Sarah, what is the Criminal Justice Initiative doing to obtain additional clemencies for people incarcerated currently? We have 40,000, an estimated 40,000. I think that it's more, but we have an estimated 40,000 folks who are still incarcerated for cannabis. And what do you think the Cannabis Justice Initiative could be doing?
Well, it is definitely more, but that is a topic for a whole own webinar. But yeah, I mean, so JaneAnne brought this up earlier, that as clemency has been utilized to date, it's not an effective systemic tool, right? It's, you know, we're seeing Trump grant, you know, 12 clemencies for people with cannabis offenses. It's really just not been used in a way to grant sort of mass clemencies, even under the Obama Clemency Project, which JaneAnne can talk about. You know, I think they were trying to have a more systemic approach, but in terms of overall impact, you know, again, it's very minimal in terms of the federal prison population. And so that's why we're really pushing for executives to utilize categorical clemency. That way, you know, they can proactively identify people like Craig and Corvain who are serving these offenses that today we no longer believe fit with the interest of justice. We really, you know that their sentences just do not comport with what justice and the majority of Americans, again, believe should be any kind of punishment, if there is any punishment to be had, for distribution or use of cannabis. Again, we've seen that successful sort of on the pardon level now in states that have legalized, but there is historical examples of presidents using categorical clemency. We saw this most famously with Vietnam draft dodgers being granted categorical clemency. And so there is precedent for this kind of approach. And so again, that link that I put in the chat, cannabisclemency.org, that's our campaign. And it not only gives you an opportunity to get involved, but it sort of goes over that historical precedent and even lays out a draft executive order. You know, there are so many ways we could reform this process to make it more effective, to make it more equitable, and to have more of an impact. So that's part of, you know, what we're pushing for, along with, again, our state clemency programs through the Cannabis Justice Initiative. And for JaneAnne's part, you know, it's sort of similar in that through the trial penalty program, again, we're looking at these specific cases where I think it's obvious to anyone, and certainly hopefully to these executives, that there's just such an injustice of being hit with a really severe sentence for exercising your right to go to trial.
Yes. And that is where I'm leading to. And I don't know that I could be so excited to talk about a trial penalty in my life. But I know that JaneAnne is, you know, so well versed. Craig, did you go to trial? No. So there's two of us that did. And I will start before I throw that question to you, JaneAnne, and I'll ask Corvain, what was the plea that they offered you and what did you receive after going to trial?
They offered me 22 years. Right? They started with 22, which you've seen previously people get that's on the same conspiracy. So you know that they're not playing with the 22 years, right? So you're like, oh, then they go to 15 and they're like, if I can cooperate it against you and Natalia, they give me 10, is what they told me, right? So I'm said, what, like, it just didn't make any sense. Like, so I'm going to trial in a place where the first thing that really needs a lot of help and that really the main focus is the conspiracy law. You know, the conspiracy law is the web you can't get out of, right? So this was built for John Gotti and the mob and stuff like this, right? They originally built the conspiracy law. So now, if I talk to Sarah on the phone, right? Sarah has nothing to do with anything. I called Sarah, I was selling weed, and now they're investigating Sarah, right? All we need now is for Jane to get on the stand and say that me and Sarah was selling weed. Sarah has a perfect record. All they're going to show is our phone calls. Me and Sarah was talking about LPP stuff and talking about freeing the 40K, right? So you can't have a law where just one person's word, that's a criminal. All the people that testified against us were all criminals, were in prison and got on the stand and all orange and got on the stand from prison. And now their word only means something when it's against to take another human being off the street. You know, I think that that is just absurd that now they're not good for anything, but they're good to be a witness to take you off. But I'm not good right now I can't even go have a smoke or have a drink because I have to check in, and I'm not good for anything until if I want to be a witness for somebody, now you're good, you know, so.
Now your value
comes out for something that is your word against theirs. And as long as they can show on that screen those phone calls, they only show me talk. They don't even have a phone conversation of me talking to Evelyn. They showed a list of us calling the number. So they don't even need to have the actual phone conversation, just the two numbers calling the other number, which the phone wasn't even in my name, you know, so it's the web you can't get out of, and that has caused, and that has the prison. That's what really has the prison full. The prison is not full of, it's full of conspiracies where you got 70 people from this conspiracy, 50 people from this, 100 people from this conspiracy, you know, so they got hundreds and thousands of people. Right? That's where the 40K, and that's where the prisoners, if you talk to any marijuana person that's in there, you rarely have the guy that was just driving down the street and he had the 2,000 pounds in the trunk and he gets the less time, right? It's better to get caught with the marijuana than to get caught in a conspiracy. I've met people that got caught doing transit, you know, they got 5,000 pounds or 10,000 or 6, they got 3-4 years. While me and Craig got the rest of our lives taken away, because if they can just pick up, they just made a case of, they didn't see Craig with the trucks. They don't have a picture of him meeting up with the guy with the truck and doing all the stuff. They don't have to have any of all that. All they have to have is the person that was driving the truck. Craig worked at the place, and now his word is good, and now Craig's off the street, you know, so I think that's just too much power for
yeah.
him.
I think we could have an entire additional webinar about conspiracy laws. The trial penalty that we're discussing here is that they were willing to give you 10 years for your actions, for the crime that you committed, but because you went to trial, they gave you life. They were willing to give me 6 months for the crime that I committed, but because I went to trial, I received 87 months. And so that is the part of this process that I call blackmail, that I think that JaneAnne can speak to. And so if you could please for us explain the trial penalty and why that's such a deserving category for executive clemency.
I think right. Oh, you're talking to Jay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right. I think Corvain, you can really explain it perhaps more eloquently than me because you lived it. But essentially, as Corvain just said, it is a penalty post-trial that is so disproportionate to what was on the table in a plea bargaining process. And effectively, it really operates to coerce people into giving up their right to trial, or should they proceed to trial, it punishes them for going to trial. So it sends a message to everybody else in the system. This is what happens if you go to trial. Now, of course, trials are written into our Constitution. We fought a revolution for trials. The right to jury trial was actually one of the reasons for the American Revolution. And it was central to our founders' vision of a society where overzealous prosecutors couldn't just simply convict somebody by accusation. But we have ended up with a system where the accusation alone becomes the conviction, because the prosecutors have such severe sentencing guidelines and severe sentencing statutes that they can use to threaten a larger punishment, that it would take a very strong, stoic person to say, you know what, I'm rejecting your offer and I'm going to go to trial. So for us, the trial penalty at the NACDL is a profound mechanism by which we've ended up with mass incarceration. It's why we have so few trials. Virtually less than 3% of cases go to trial. Decades ago, about 20% of cases would go to trial. But not having trials means we don't have a testing of prosecutors' cases, and prosecutors don't have to put too much work into their cases because they can just get a guilty plea quickly, as opposed to a trial, which takes them months of preparation. We don't have juries coming in and making a decision that even if we think you're guilty on the facts, we're still not going to convict you because, we just don't think marijuana is that serious. And so we're going to acquit you. I mean, juries in the original concept of juries were also sort of the moral conscience of the community. But because we have no jury trials, we have lost that moral conscience. So that's why NACDL really cares about the trial penalty, and why we think it matters, and why we think it's an appropriate category for clemency. And I would just add that in my trial penalty project, most of the cases we dealt with previously were cases where people did go to trial, but we're adding cases now where people pled and took a very, very lengthy sentence because they did so in the shadow of an even more serious sentence that would occur down the road. So at the end of the day, the trial penalty is operating in every single case in our system.
Yes, it is absolutely the piece that I found most disturbing in my case. Sitting in the cell constantly thinking about, I could have only been sitting here for 6 months had I not gone to trial, that my crime had not changed, had not been altered, that nothing prior to trial had been any different, but because I exercised my right, because I knew it was a right to exercise, right? Like I have this same sort of idea about my rights as a citizen to a trial and to a jury of my peers. But that is the piece of that entire experience that I could not wrap my mind around, is how did it go from sitting in prison for 6 months to now sitting in prison for 87 months to receiving 10 years for Corvain to life, and what can be done, and how do we get folks to talk about this very piece of injustice. Sarah, in your work with constituents consistently, are you seeing the trial penalty as sort of often, like are there more folks than not who have suffered the trial penalty? And I guess I would say, I think they deserve special treatment when it comes to clemency. I don't know how to articulate that any differently, but is there a large number of folks who have suffered the trial penalty? And then how do we sort of write their clemencies in a way that says, hey, this is why they deserve it because of that penalty?
Yeah, so I think people sometimes see our partnership on the trial penalty program and, sort of go, or they don't know as much about sort of this penalty or the justice system. But pretty invariably, as JaneAnne mentioned, even if it's someone that didn't go to trial, again, we see people taking these really egregious plea deals because of that specter of what could happen at trial. And so I would say across the board, pretty much all of our constituents have faced some facet of the trial penalty. And that's why we have this partnership, because really all of our constituents fit into that. And I think, of course, that makes sense. You know, when you think about someone getting a life sentence or even a sentence of 87 months for a nonviolent first-time cannabis offense, of course, something like that is probably at play. So we definitely see that in our constituency. And I think NACDL and JaneAnne do a fantastic job within the clemency petitions of really calling that out. And again, because often the folks that are reviewing these petitions don't have maybe as keen of an awareness of that, you know, operating, or, you know, they've been on the other side of that. So I think NACDL is doing a fantastic job of highlighting that and why it is so unjust in each and every petition. But JaneAnne could maybe speak more to exactly, you know, how they do that.
Well, we highlight that as one of the factors to support clemency, along with all the other factors that would exist in a particular case, such as maybe their sentence will be lower today. That's actually pretty true of a lot of the drug cases. The extraordinary record of the individual in prison, the huge community support for them, the big social network there to sort of catch them when they come out and help them reintegrate into society. Because I want to go back to something that Corvain said earlier about how difficult it was to re-enter. It was interesting when you talked to me about you mentioned the banking issue as one of the new things I've heard. I had one client who she came out and there was like a $30,000 debt that she owed the local jail for housing her while she was in pretrial detention before her federal case. Just kind of insane. So I'm just encountering all the time different aspects of the return that's so difficult for people, leaving aside the fact that they're, you know, relationships have been sundered apart. They may not have seen family for a long time. They may have been housed very far away and the family wasn't able to come visit them every week. Trying to get a job when you have a felony conviction, trying to get housing when you have a felony conviction, voting. There are people who face deportation because of that conviction. So the collateral consequences are severe. And there's a professor who's coined the term mass conviction. When we think that 70 million people in America have a criminal record, you begin to realize the need for massive pardons of people. Corvain, you were talking about that you don't need just clemency right now. You need a pardon in order to be able to wipe the slate clean and embrace the years ahead as a, you know, as your own person. And I'm completely on board with that.
Thank you. And then before we wrap, Craig, you did not go to trial, probably the smarter decision, but you still received life. So did you ever think that you should have taken the fighting chance, or that, how did, and did the thought of a steeper penalty at trial cause you to accept the guilty plea?
Actually, I didn't accept a guilty plea. I was originally charged in Chicago, and they ended up dropping the charges and then pursuing a forfeiture against me. Then I was charged in Corpus Christi, Texas, and I did go to trial.
Okay.
And during the trial, the government dismissed the charge. And I didn't know at the time that I should have forced them to take it to trial and let myself be acquitted. But then they charged me again in Georgia. And in Georgia, the jury was in the box, the opening instructions were out, and the lawyer just sat down and said, I can't do anything. So that ended up basically being my plea.
Good.
And the plea agreement guaranteed I would not get more than level 32, which would be about 8 years.
So it went from 8 to life. I'm sorry, I misunderstood you when I asked the first time. So you also went from 8 to life. And that's such a steep penalty, you all, for going to trial. And something else that you just mentioned, I know we're wrapping, but that really affected myself and also Corvain, is the idea that because this is a federal case, they can try you, right? In these places. It didn't work in Texas, it didn't work in Chicago. And so now you're being tried, you know, down in the deep of the South, where drug laws have been and were built to really stick and, you know, really get convictions, right? Like I was told in the very beginning that had I been tried in California, it would have been an extremely different outcome than being tried in North Carolina. And so to even hear that, you know, you won twice, I know you're optimistic going in that third time, and then to receive life, goodness. So there's a lot to be said here. There's a lot that LPP is doing, JaneAnne, that Corvain is doing, that we are all doing here to first inform you all, because I believe that the missing piece of this is information. There are so many people that I meet that are just unaware that folks are still in prison for cannabis. And then you become unaware that you could not only double, triple, quadruple your sentence for going to trial. And then they're unaware that they could try you in states that you have never visited. Like, there's so many pieces to this puzzle that folks are uneducated about. And so that is always first and foremost my driving factor in this industry, is how do we educate folks who are participating in this industry, this regulated industry, so freely, with smiles on their faces, while so many families and lives have still been devastated. So I do want to thank everyone that has tuned into this conversation, because by educating yourselves, you are able to now go out and have conversations. You are now informed, and you are one of the many folks who now are in the know. And so it's like, well, what do we do with the know? How do you put action to the know? I'll let Sarah tell you about our what we have going, but you can always visit us at lastprisonerproject.org. There is the Time to Heal petition. Please follow us on Instagram, share the content. Just in regular life, where we are in 2021, is that unless it goes viral, nothing is getting done, right? Alice Johnson, thank goodness for Kim Kardashian, right? Like, unless you, and I love Kim, I don't really love where the world is though, right? Like, it should not take that, but that is where we are. And how do we push this forward? You've got to hit the share button. You've got to send, you've got to get more folks involved, because that is what is making change right now. It is the world of Twitter and Instagram. So please get involved that way. And then Sarah and JaneAnne, if you want to share other ways that folks can get involved, I'd be happy to hear.
You nailed it. And I put the links for our Take Action page in the chat as well. It's just lastprisonerproject.org/take action. And that has all of our current campaigns and our letter writing program. So that's the easiest place to go to get involved.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And then Craig, I know, I work with you closely. There's a lot that is being done on the reentry side, and you are constantly talking to folks that are still incarcerated. Is there something in addition to what Sarah has just said that could be done?
What we have to do is bring awareness. People have to get a hold of their congressman. As you know, I would actually rather see a law that gives relief to absolutely everybody with a federal cannabis conviction. Because as I well learned, how did I get clemency and we left behind at least 25 lifers that I know of, or 24. And why did I get relief and they didn't? The clemency, process is arbitrary. So I do want people to get a hold of their congressman, get a hold of everybody, and say we need to do something about these people in prison for marijuana.
Thank you. And Corvain Cooper showed up with a free Humberto t-shirt on, which is at least the point that folks were still left behind. Like, the buck did not stop here. There are so many people left behind. Corvain, what can we do to not only free Humberto, but what can we do just as a whole community to support the inmates still incarcerated?
I think first, just look up, lifers and see how many have petitions first, right? And sign their petition. That's free. Let's start with the free things to do. You can sign up with Last Prisoner Project for the stamps. Get the stamp in a letter and just say, I got so many uplifting letters of just, you're going to make it. You're going to get through this. Like that's close to free. It's not all the way free because you have to buy the stamp, but they have a letter writing program that is just very, 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 very beneficial at Last Prisoner Project. That really helped me out a lot. So after you start to do those two things, like Craig said, now the people that can go a little further and have a little bit more knowledge on how to get to legislation, how to get to Congress, how to get to the White House, how to get to these places, right? To get the law changed so the 40,000 people, which is an arbitrary number, so we can get those people home and free. And like Craig said, just leaving behind Luke and leaving behind Parker and leaving behind Humberto and leaving behind Pedro and listen. Leaving behind all these people is like a very, very, very serious thing, because you're leaving behind your brother, you're leaving behind somebody that was in the same fight as you, and we're no better than them, and we're all tried to use this plant to get a better life. And if we tried to heal as many people as we can, we tried to do the most thing that we can do with the plant. And we just want to be able to get our new life, get up and be able to get in the industry and be able to have the legacy guys in the industry is would really be good. But what we really need to do is really everybody work together, share. Tell a friend, tell people, because the thing about it is knowledge. No one knows. People still don't know that it exists because they're saying, oh no, it's weed is legal, it's free, it's this, is that. No, it's not. It's not federally legal. So you can still get arrested today and you can still get your life taken away today. So please get your record expunged. If you have, we have expungement clinics, we can teach you how to do that. Please get your record expunged, and please pay attention and learn as much knowledge as you can possibly learn about the things that are going on behind the scenes.
Well, thank you. And with that, we will wrap and return your Fridays to you. Thank you all for joining, and happy Friday. And you'll be able to catch this recording on our YouTube channel. So have a great day, everyone.
Thanks so much, Evelyn.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Craig. Bye-bye, Corvain.
Okay,
Congratulations again.
bye.